Close the door, Clara. We don't need another filthy stray crawling inside. Dr. Henry's voice cracked across the empty clinic, sharp and weary from years of disappointment. His daughter froze at the threshold, glancing at the small shadow, dragging itself closer. The shape was almost pitiful. A golden-coated puppy, ribs visible, its fragile body pressed against the weight of a torn canvas bag it pulled along the gravel. The bag scraped with a sound that pierced the silence, a strange burden no one had expected to see at this late hour. Clara hesitated, torn between her father's harshness and the silent plea in the animal's eyes. The clinic sat on the edge of a rural town where most strays were left to fend for themselves, but this was no ordinary arrival. The pup staggered with each step, determined yet trembling, as though its tiny legs bore more than just the ragged cloth. A faint metallic smell drifted on the air, reaching Clara before the truth became visible. The canvas was stained, dark patches spreading like old bruises across its folds. The puppy whimpered, collapsing for a moment before biting down on the strap again and tugging with the strength of something far greater than its fragile body. Dr. Henry clenched his jaw and muttered, "These creatures always come broken. People expect miracles when there's nothing left to save." His bitterness came not from cruelty, but years of watching lives slip beyond his reach. Clara, however, couldn't ignore the stubborn rhythm of the puppy's movements. She rushed forward despite his protest, crouching low to meet the small messenger. The pup's eyes were clouded yet alive, pools of exhaustion fighting to remain. Open. Its body shook, but it pressed its head against her knee, nudging the bag forward as if demanding she look inside. She carefully unzipped the torn fabric, her fingers trembling. Inside lay a bundle wrapped in an old towel, soaked through in crimson that had long since darkened to brown. With a gasp, Clara peeled back the fabric and revealed a limp paw, tiny, belonging to another pup. Its chest barely rose. Each breath, a ghost of life. The stronger puppy had dragged its sibling across dust and gravel, through fields and alleys to this doorstep. For a long moment, silence hung heavy. Even Dr. Henry's practiced cynicism cracked as he saw the truth. The surviving pup licked at its sibling's ear, then pushed the bag forward again as though begging the humans to do what it could not. Clara's throat burned. She whispered, "Dad, he carried him here. All this way. He's not asking for food. He's asking for help." The weight of her words clashed with the bitterness that had built in Dr. Henry like stone. But the sight before him was undeniable, devotion and desperation embodied in the fragile frame of a stray. The older man knelt at last, his hands, once rough from years of sutures and lost battles, gently lifting the injured pup from the bag. Its breathing rattled faintly, shallow and uncertain, but still there. The golden-coated sibling refused to back away, whining low as its tail gave a single, hopeful wag. Clara pressed her palm to its head, steadying its shaking body. "He carried his brother here, Dad. If that doesn't deserve a chance, nothing does." The clinic lights above flickered, throwing long shadows across the table where Dr. Henry now laid the wounded pup. He didn't answer immediately, but his silence spoke of a man caught between surrender and obligation. The surviving puppy scrambled clumsily onto a chair to keep its gaze locked on the table, as if unwilling to let its sibling out of sight. When Dr. Henry finally spoke, his voice had softened, though it still carried the weight of caution. One doesn't have much time. The wound is deep, and infection has already set in, but I'll try." Clara exhaled in relief, a flood of gratitude washing over her. The stronger pup gave a small, tired bark, as if it understood. The night outside pressed in with the sound of cicadas and distant wind, but inside the clinic, the faint spark of hope glowed against the sterile walls. No one could predict what the outcome would be, but something had shifted. A father who had long abandoned miracles now held one trembling in his hands, and a stray puppy had forced open the door that years of bitterness had sealed shut. And as the first incision began, the golden-coated pup laid its head on Clara's arm, eyes fixed on the table, unwilling to close until the fate of its sibling was written. The clinic was never meant to feel like a battlefield, yet the air inside had turned heavy, as though every breath hung between life and loss. Dr. Henry's hands moved with the precision of muscle memory, but even he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down. He worked in silence, suturing, with practiced calm, though sweat gathered along his brow. Clara hovered nearby, whispering quiet encouragements to the golden pup who refused to leave her side. Its trembling form leaned into her, ears flattened, but its eyes never strayed from the table. The wounded puppy lay motionless under the bright lamp, chest rising and falling in a fragile rhythm. Dr. Henry reached deeper into the wound, and, for a moment, the sound of metal against metal filled the room as he fished out a shard of glass buried near the ribcage. He held it up for only a second before dropping it into the tray. He must have crawled through broken bottles, he muttered, shaking his head, and yet his brother carried him here. There was a flicker of awe in his voice, though he quickly buried it beneath his usual restraint. Then the monitors wavered. The faint beeping faltered, dropping in tone, each sound sharper than a knife. Clara's heart lurched. "Dad, he's slipping." Her words cracked as she saw the pup's chest falter. The golden one barked suddenly, high-pitched and desperate, as if sensing the danger before the humans did. It leapt down from the chair and scrambled toward the table, paws scrabbling against the cold floor, trying to climb. Dr. Henry snapped, "Hold him back!" But his voice betrayed more urgency than anger. Clara scooped the golden pup into her arms, clutching its quivering body as it yelped in protest. Its cries filled the clinic like a chorus of pleading. The sound echoed through Henry's chest, reminding him of the voices he had shut out for years. He bent over the injured pup, performing compressions with careful rhythm, his eyes narrowing against the tide of doubt. For a breathless moment, nothing answered. The chest remained still. The monitor hummed in flat defiance. Clara's eyes burned. With tears she refused to let fall. She whispered to the golden pup, "He's trying. Don't give up yet." Then, against the silence, a faint gasp. The chest rose, weak but present. The beeping stuttered, then steadied into a fragile rhythm. Once again. Relief swept through Clara's body, though Dr. Henry only muttered, "We're not out of danger yet." Still, even he could not ignore the tremor in his own voice. Hours stretched like days. The clinic's clock ticked past midnight, then into the early hours of dawn. Clara dozed in a chair, the golden pup curled against her chest, its breath warm and shallow. Dr. Henry remained hunched at the table, tending, stitching, and bandaging with relentless focus. At last, as the first light of morning crept through the blinds, he stepped back. The smaller pup lay wrapped in clean gauze, his chest rising in steadier breaths. "He'll need time," Henry whispered, exhaustion catching up with him. "But he has a chance." The words carried more than medical fact. They carried something Clara hadn't heard from him in years. Hope. The golden pup stirred at her side, ears twitching as if it understood. Clara placed it gently beside its brother on the table, watching as it curled against him, refusing to let go even now. The sight pierced straight through the walls her father had built, stirring a silence that felt like healing. But just as relief began to settle, a sudden knock rattled the clinic's front door. Both father and daughter froze. Few visitors ever came at this hour. Clara rose, opening the door, to find a boy of barely 10 standing barefoot in the dust. His shirt was torn, his eyes wide with both fear and urgency. He clutched something against his chest, another bundle wrapped in cloth, damp with blood. "My dog. Please, sir. She's not breathing, right?" The boy's voice shook as he held the bundle closer. Clara saw the trembling form inside, another injured animal, this one older, ribs sunken with hunger and fur matted with dirt. Dr. Henry stared at the child, the weight of the night bearing down on him. "Clara," he whispered, "we don't have the supplies. Not after this." His gaze fell on the siblings lying together, one barely saved, the other exhausted from the journey. Another life now waited at the threshold, and his years of bitterness threatened to return. But Clara looked from the boy's tear-streaked face to the golden pup that had refused to give up. Something about the timing, the persistence of these creatures felt larger than coincidence. She turned to her father and said firmly, "We can't send him away, not after last night, not ever again." The boy stepped forward, his arms shaking as he held out the limp animal. The golden pup barked weakly from the table, as though urging the choice itself. Dr. Henry closed his eyes for a moment, and when they opened again, the resignation that once ruled them was gone. "Bring her in," he said at last. The clinic. Door closed behind them, shutting out the rising sun. Inside, the struggle for life began again, and for the first time in years, Dr. Henry felt the weight of miracles pressing against his hands. The air inside the clinic had grown heavy, filled with the metallic tang of disinfectant and the faint sound of labored breathing. Clara sat near the table, her hand resting gently on the golden-coated pup, who had not moved since his sibling was placed in the sterile light. Every rise and fall of the tiny chest on the table was a fragile thread, threatening to snap at any moment. Dr. Henry moved with methodical precision, but there was a strain in his face that betrayed his own doubts. He had seen wounds like this before, wounds that often ended in silence, yet something about the stubborn loyalty of the surviving pup pushed him to keep trying longer than he normally would. The tension deepened when the monitor beside the table emitted an erratic beep. Clara's heart jumped and the stronger pup whimpered, clawing lightly at the chair as if demanding an explanation. Dr. Henry tightened his grip on the instruments. "The infection is worse than I thought," he muttered, under his breath, sweat forming at his brow. For a fleeting second, Clara thought he might give up, that old resignation taking root again, but instead he reached for another vial, preparing an injection that could buy them time. His eyes darted briefly to Clara, then to the sibling watching, them with unwavering devotion, and he whispered something that sounded less like a medical statement and more like a vow. Not tonight. But just as a sliver of hope flickered, the front door of the clinic banged open. A figure rushed in, carrying a bundled shape that left streaks of mud and blood across the tiles. It was a farmhand from the outskirts of town, face pale and frantic. "Doctor, you've got to help. My dog, she got caught in barbed wire trying to save her litter." His voice broke under the weight of panic. He had wrapped the injured mother dog in a tattered coat, her breathing shallow, her fur matted and torn. Clara froze, torn between the desperate eyes of the stranger and the fragile battle already unfolding on the table. Dr. Henry's gaze hardened. For the first time in years, he had more lives in his hands than he could save at once. The farmhand pleaded, his voice quivering, "Please, she's all I've got." Behind him, faint whimpers echoed from a basket, tiny newborns that shifted blindly, their survival hanging on the fate of the mother. The clinic, usually a place of tired routine and half-empty nights, had suddenly become a stage of impossible choices. Clara turned to her father, her voice trembling. "You can't leave either of them, Dad. Look at that pup. He carried his brother here, and now this mother. Her babies won't survive without her." Her words collided with his silence, pressing against years of frustration that told him he wasn't a savior, just a man with limitations. Yet, as the golden pup pressed closer against Clara's arm, its eyes locked onto the table with an intensity too human to ignore, Dr. Henry realized something was shifting inside him. He ordered Clara to prepare another table, his voice stern, but charged with urgency. The farmhand scrambled to help, and within minutes the clinic became a storm of movement. One pup fighting for its life under sterile light, a mother dog stretched across another table with her litter waiting in the corner, and the golden-coated sibling pacing restlessly as though carrying the weight of all of them. The tension was almost unbearable, every sound amplified, the sharp snip of scissors cutting sutures, the ragged breaths of the animals, the creak of the old ceiling fan that seemed out of place in such a fragile moment. The twist of fate was cruel, yet it revealed something Clara had never seen in her father before. He worked with a ferocity that defied his age, his hands steady though his jaw was clenched tight. For every flicker of weakness in the injured pup, he adjusted. For every cry of pain from the mother dog, he pushed harder, unwilling to let the night end in defeat. The golden pup barked once, high-pitched and trembling, almost like a signal, and Clara found herself whispering back, "Hold on, just a little longer." As the hours stretched, the balance between life and death wavered. The injured siblings, breathing slowed dangerously, the monitor dipping into silence before jolting back with faint rhythm. On the other table, the mother dog's pulse faltered, her eyes rolling back before snapping forward again. Sweat dripped from Dr. Henry's brow, his shirt damp from the strain. The clinic was no longer just a place of medicine. It had become a battlefield where loyalty, love, and desperation collided in ways no one had anticipated. By dawn, when the first rays of light crept through the blinds, the outcome was still uncertain. Both patients lay stitched, bandaged, and fragile, but alive. Clara sank into a chair, exhausted, the golden pup climbing onto her lap and pressing against her chest as though it, too, had fought the battle. The farmhand knelt beside his dog, whispering thanks through tears, and in the corner, the tiny litter stirred, their whimpers soft, waiting for their mother's warmth. Yet the day's first breath carried no promise of victory, for now it was only survival. And survival, Clara realized, was enough to keep hope alive. The clinic had grown heavy with silence, the kind that presses against the chest and makes every sound sharper. The smell of antiseptic hung in the air, clashing with the copper sting of blood that clung to the wounded pup's fur. Clara stood at the edge of the table, hands gripping the counter so tightly her knuckles whitened. The golden-coated puppy, exhausted from its journey, refused to leave its brother's side. It leaned against the metal leg of the table, eyes never straying from the fragile body stretched across the sterile sheet. Dr. Henry's movements were steady but urgent, each stitch fighting against the relentless tide of infection that had already begun to spread. The wound was deeper than he first believed, torn open by something sharp and cruel. He pressed gauze firmly, watching the weak chest rise and fall in fragile rhythm. "He's losing strength," Henry muttered under his breath, his words carrying no hope, only the grim honesty of a man who had seen too many endings. Clara swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "Then give him your strength. Please, Dad, don't let him fade after coming this far." The puppy on the floor gave a sharp bark, weak but determined, startling Henry in the middle of his work. It was not just a cry, it was a command, a demand that the humans understand. The room stilled, and for the first time, Henry looked down, not only at the dying pup, but at the sibling who had carried him here, dragging the bag across miles of gravel and dirt. In those clouded eyes, he saw no surrender. Against his own bitterness, a flicker of something he thought he had buried stirred inside him. As Henry worked, the pup on the table suddenly convulsed, a sharp gasp rattling from its chest before its body went slack. Clara cried out and reached forward, but her father's hand shot up, firm and commanding. "Don't touch him yet." He adjusted the instruments, pressing his ear close, searching for the faintest beat. Seconds stretched like hours, the silence almost unbearable until finally Henry whispered, "He's still there. Faint, but he's still there." Clara's knees nearly buckled with relief, but her father's tone shifted, low and heavy. "If he makes it through tonight, it will be because of more than my hands. He needs something I can't give." Clara blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" He turned his gaze toward the golden-coated puppy, still trembling but refusing to lie. "Down. That one carried him here. That kind of bond. It can pull him back where medicine can't. Let them stay together. No cages. No separation." Clara carefully lifted the golden-coated pup, placing it gently on the table beside its sibling. The little one pressed its body close, licking the stitched wound as though sealing it with its own devotion. The weak pup stirred faintly, a whimper escaping its throat. Henry's brows furrowed, his professional detachment cracking in the face of what he was witnessing. He had spent years treating animals as cases, numbers, outcomes, but this was different. This was loyalty that defied reason, sacrifice that human hands could not measure. The night stretched on, each hour a battle. Clara brewed coffee she barely drank, while Henry refused to leave the table. The golden puppy never moved, except to nudge its brother's body closer whenever the chill of weakness threatened to take hold. At dawn, the fragile pup's breathing shifted from rattling gasps to slow, steady rhythm. The first light of morning spilled through the window, landing across the table, catching in the glass of the instruments that lay scattered from the desperate fight to keep life alive. And then, just as Clara allowed herself a breath of relief, the door of the clinic burst open. A man in mud-stained boots stormed inside, his eyes cold, his hands gripping a rusted chain. He froze at the sight of the two pups on the table, then snarled, "So, this is where they ran off to." Clara instinctively stepped between him and the table, her heart hammering. Henry stiffened, a shadow of recognition crossing his face. The man spat on the floor, pointing a calloused finger at the wounded pup. "That one's mine. Worthless little runt couldn't even guard the yard. Thought I'd be rid of him when he crawled off. Didn't think he'd drag dead weight to your door." His voice was coarse, lacking even a shred of compassion. Clara's stomach turned, horror rising in her throat. The golden pup growled, its tiny body trembling with both exhaustion and defiance, planting itself between the man and its sibling. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. The sterile clinic, filled only hours ago with the desperate rhythm of survival, now bristled with something darker. Clara gripped the edge of the table, her voice barely steady. "They don't belong to you anymore." The man's eyes narrowed, and his hand tightened around the chain. In that instant, the fragile hope that had filled the clinic was threatened, not by nature's cruelty but by human neglect. And as Henry stepped forward, his tired eyes locked with the man's, the air in the room shifted once again, this time toward a confrontation no one had expected. The man's voice filled the clinic like a poisoned wind, coarse and unyielding. "Step aside. They're mine, and I'll take them back." His hand clutched the chain as if ready to strike, but the golden pup would not move, its trembling body standing guard over its brother with a courage that seemed to shame the room into silence. Clara's breath caught in her throat, yet she planted her feet and did not waver. Dr. Henry rose slowly, his hands still marked with blood from the night's work. For years he had avoided battles like this, choosing the easier road of silence, but something in the sight before him cracked through that armor of resignation. He saw more than strays. He saw devotion that had carried life across miles of dirt, and pain, and he realized the clinic was no longer just a place of endings. It could be a place where loyalty was honored. He stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "You left them to die. You forfeited your claim the moment that puppy dragged his brother to this door. They're not going anywhere." The man sneered, taking one step closer, but Henry did not retreat. The years of bitterness in his eyes had burned away, replaced with a quiet fire. Clara moved to his side, her hand brushing the table where the pups lay. The golden pup barked once, sharp and defiant, the sound far larger than its size. The wounded sibling stirred faintly at the noise, its breathing stronger now, a fragile life clinging on. That single moment broke the standoff. The man looked from the dogs to Henry and Clara, and something in their unyielding faces told him this was not his ground to claim. With a muttered curse, he turned, the chain clattering against the floor as he left. The slam of the door echoed like thunder, but it marked an ending Clara had prayed for. Silence returned, softer this time, carrying with it the weight of survival. Clara knelt by the table, stroking the golden pup's back. "You saved him. You saved all of us," she whispered. Dr. Henry placed a hand on her shoulder, his face softened in a way she hadn't seen in years. "Sometimes it takes the smallest life to remind us why we fight," he said, his voice low but sure. Morning light spilled fully across the clinic, wrapping the room in quiet warmth. The stitched pup shifted weakly, resting its head against its sibling. The golden-coated guardian finally lay down, its body curling protectively around the one it had refused to abandon. Clara leaned close, her eyes damp, while Henry watched with a gaze no longer bitter but resolute. The night had begun, with despair, but it ended with something far greater. Two fragile strays had carried into the clinic not just a plea for survival, but a lesson stronger than any medicine. Loyalty and love are sometimes the only miracles we need, and in that truth, Henry knew his hands would never again turn a life away from the door.